Well, it's 2017, a whole new year for Audio Energy. My name is Shannon. Why don't you stick around and see what we got? Okay, welcome to Audio Energy. My name's Shannon. If this is your first time here, I'm an audio engineer and sound designer, do composition and things as well. I mainly work in sort of post-production mixing for video and film, as well as doing bands and things like that as well. I'm an audio engineer, qualified audio engineer, and I really love doing mixes and stuff. I mainly work with Pro Tools, and that's what you'll be seeing with a lot of my mixes. Have a look at my videos that I already have up. A relatively new channel, started in September, October 2016, and each week I'm just putting up a new video that we look at mixes. I look at some of my mixes, some mixes by other people, and always trying to keep things refreshed. I basically ablib everything, so I try to keep it all flowing as much as possible, and bringing material and videos that are useful for you, that you might have with looking at your mix. Doesn't matter if you're a qualified engineer or just do production or work with bands or whatever. This is, I believe, this can be helpful for you, and I think it's time that we move very shortly into having a look at this. Now, just one quick word. Next week I may not be putting a video up because I'll be in Melbourne. I have to fly down there for a few days and do a couple of things. Then I'll be back. So I may do one over the weekend. So if it's delayed, I will put a mention of it up on my Facebook page and my audioenergy.com website. I might look at trying to do some new things with the website as well, but at the moment it's just kind of showing what I do, who I am, what I've been involved in. So you can have a quick look there, but it's I'm doing all this myself. So you know, as a new, just come out of college, you're a new student, you don't have a lot of money, so you've got to learn to do what you can. Anyway, why don't we have a look at this mix? In part 2 of the Sorcerers Ball mix, I basically went through and showed a whole lot of discussion on how I put the mix together with parallel compression, how I organised all the instrument groups. I was using a lot of VSTs and things like that, with mixed with audio as well, recorded audio and guitars. The Sorcerers Ball mix is from an old album that I did in about 2010. It was my first sort of go at a solo EP or album. I had it on Reverb Nation and things like that. At the time, I didn't know a lot. I was more of a musician. I didn't know a lot about engineering and stuff, and so I went and did a degree in engineering and learnt to do a much better mix, and so I wanted to redo a lot of that work that I did before, because it was good, it just didn't sound as good as it should have. Now, in this video, what I'll be looking at is basically there were some issues that I had that I wasn't happy with in the previous mix. Everything did sound good. It sounded good on my my reference speakers here that I had, but when I took it over to some other reference speakers, it really sort of partly the amp was a little bit of a problem, but I did hear some other issues as well. So I wanted to really go back and have a look at this mix and see if I could change a few things and see what some of the problems were. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit of that today, and just some different approaches that I've taken as well to how I've kind of changed things around. Now, I will be doing some new recording of the guitars and probably the bass. So what I've done as well is I've put in a couple of different aspects to maybe beef this up a bit. The second reason I wanted to go and have a look at this again was basically because over the holidays I sat down with my brother and watched Sound City. It was one of the, I've seen bits of it before, but it was the first time I sat down and watched it all the way through. And Sound City with Dave Grohl, you may have seen it. They had a Neve desk, and there was this, in the very early on at the beginning of the video, is constantly hearing this awesome punchy sound for the kick drum and other instruments and things. So, which leads me onto the topic I still haven't got around to chatting about, which is reference tracks and using reference tracks and things. I'm going to do a specific video on that probably next week, or the week after. So for now, why don't we have a look at what I've done, and I'll just bring this up, start recording my screen. Okay, so I'm going to go across here, and I've redone my drums, And as you can see, I basically went back to the MIDI tracks. I use Easy Drummer and then record all that down and print it down into audio. Okay. Now I've shown you how to do that in one of my other videos. I think it might be Sorcerers Ball Mix Part 1, which actually has a different title, but you'll see it there. Now what I've done also, I've gone back and had a look at the kick drum. So I've got my 2 kick drum tracks, and I've run it through to a kick sub. I've put on a gate and just sort of given it a little bit more of an open hold and compression there, and got the threshold about 17.2 or neg 17.2. And so what this does, it allows the kick to come through and still have a bit of that resonance there, but then it starts to cut off reasonably quickly and blend in with the rest of the mix. I also have my mixing desk. Now I wanted to go and just try a bit of Neve and see how some of these Neve emulators kind of sound. So I also have my virtual channel mix bus here. I've got it on the British Neve setting. I have a preamp, and then I have the Neve EQ. I then have the lift, okay, which is kind of like a dynamic, a sonic enhancer a little bit. It just gives a bit more oomph into the low end of the kick. It can be punchy or big. These are all Slate tools, and then I've run it through a basic red compressor here. Well, it's not the red compressor that's used in other ones, but it's just their emulation of it. I don't use their presets. I do everything myself. I got the threshold set quite low. I got the ratio 1.5, a very slow attack. Because when you squash them down, I don't want it squashing my kick transients. I want it to be as natural as possible, let it stay open, let the air around it really breathe and thump. I have got a bit of a faster release, so the compressor is coming down slow and coming off like that. So as I play it, you'll see this will give you a bit of an indication of how the compressor is working, and essentially you want it to work with the timing and rhythm of the whole music piece itself. Now I'm going to play a little bit of this for a minute. Okay, so that gives you a pretty good listen to just how things are coming along. I've really given this kick a lot more attack, sort of at the top, the higher range frequencies, so it gets a bit of that snap off the skin from the beater. But you want to blend that in well with the back microphone on the back of the kick, and that's really capturing a lot more of the deeper, lower frequencies, and you blend them together so you got a nice snappy attack, but a lot of good thump that you can work there with as well. What I've done with this kick drum, the reason I've separated that as well is because I want to put this on, and this is my tape machine. Okay, this is the tape emulator. I've got on 15 inches per second. I've got a half track 2-inch, so that way it gives the transients, as if they were going to tape, it would give the transients a lot more room and space to really open up and have that real big thick sort of saturation and oomph there that it's going to get from a tape machine. Moving along, I've done the same thing as well with my snares. Okay, so I've got a snare sub, I've got just some EQ on there as well, and I've got a little bit of a compressor there. I've got the grey compressor on that, so just to give it a bit of a lift. I've also used a second reverb track, so I want it to have a little bit more openness and space. So I've used on this one, and I've done a video on this before, this is the Abbey Road EQ technique, or the EQ trick. And basically it's rolling off a lot of the low end up to about 600 Hz and rolling it down probably around 5,000. You can go down even further if you like, it's just going to restrict the amount of it. And then you do a bit of a tuck here around 1K to get rid of some of that kind of flappy, terrible sound that can sometimes have. Now, bear in mind that these are all emulators, the VST as well as these, they're all emulators and things. and the reverb here. This is also from Slate Tools, and I've just given that a little bit more room, so it's a presence here, but it's not that wide. It's about 750 milliseconds thereabouts, but it starts draining off around 500. But you'll hear that in the mix as well. I'll shut up this time. So there you go. The rest of the drums, hats, the toms, the overheads, room I've pulled down a bit because there is a room mic from the twin track drums as well. So I've let all these run through. I'm using, I just thought I'd try out some Waves EQ here just to hear that sound, bring them up a little bit rather than just cut everything. So I just wanted to cut everything there a little bit. And it's all running through to my drum sub. And then I have a glue verb here, and I'm just using, I've got rid of the other verb that I had, and I'm just using a very short 100 millisecond verb, 2 millisecond pre-delay, and it's just a small plate there, so you don't want this to be very evident in the mix. You can bring it down about 2 or 3 dB, but what it's going to do is essentially, because everything's so short, it's almost at a the decay time is almost so short that you won't actually hear reflections moving about. It's just going to be constantly going, but just give it a little bit more space around the drums. That's why we use the glue type verb to do that. In my submix, I have again a preamp just to give it a little bit more drive. I've got my mix bus. I've got some EQ and a little bit of lift again, just give it a little bit more energy in that. In the drums across the board there. What I've also done, let's move away from the drums, I've reprinted, or re-recorded I should say if you want to put it that way, the piano. Again, I've just used a Waves EQ on this one. I've got most of my cues are quite short. If you want to know what cue is, it's basically the amount of width that you're applying to your cut. Works horizontally essentially to make that width of that cut wider or smaller or very narrow, so you can really narrow right down onto a specific frequency. So we use Q, which is this one here, to really be more accurate on what we're actually cutting out. So for instance, on this piano there is a particular resonance up in the high end that's quite annoying, and so I basically pulled that a lot tighter, and it's up around about 2.5K it comes in at, but it sort of sits between 2 and about 3.2, and it's kind of this annoying ringing, so I had to really sort of pull that out and cut that out because it's it just doesn't sound good. I think it's actually part of the VST instrument itself. It's a contact instrument. They're good. But obviously there are better ones, but that's what I'm using at the point. I also have on this one, this is my second piano, I've used Blue Cats to have a bit of a play with this because this was very much a dry piano sound. It's very, let's see if we can have a listen here. So it's a very kind of old sound compared to this one. It's a nice, deeper, richer piano. So you can hear that going. So when you combine the two, as I've shown in another video, basically the reason I've put these two together, I may even remove that one, I'll see how I go. It just adds a little bit of quality and context to the whole piano sound itself, because in the original track I did two different pianos and I sort of up-pitched one, I think maybe by a whole tone, and it just gave this interesting kind of harpsichord sound, and I wanted to keep a little bit of that but move more towards a natural piano sound. So that's why I've just mixed those two together, excuse me, and come up with an original sound, something that's interesting and that people can't quite pick what's going on. for the EQ in this, I've basically used the Custom Series Equalizer by Slate and the SSL EQ emulation, and also used the Revival here just to sort of add a little bit of thickness. I can do this instead of using a verb glue, but I've also put that here anyway, and I still have to do a little bit of work with that. On the orchestral elements, I've taken away the brass and the wood lows, because I think they were tending to mask some of the other frequencies in the guitars and the bass and the kick drum. So I wanted to eliminate that. Okay, so I've kept the big strings, I've kept the staccato, which is the high pitch part. I've kept the big strings. It's basically, the big strings is basically my harmonies. And I've kept the melody strings in here as well, and this is actually using a different plugin. I'm using a contact plugin for it. I think it's session strings. Okay, you can hear this one playing the melody more. So there you go, there's a bit of a listen to those. So I've essentially wanted to go back, bring things a little brighter, because when I was mastering all this, as I said, I could hear everything great. It was coming through clearly, but there was still a loss of some of the air that was around the instrument, some of the brightness. The kick had lost a lot of its high range attack that I wanted to sort of have there to back up the lower end. There was too much going on in the strings, so I've pulled it back a little bit. The pianos weren't quite, I don't know, they sound a little artificial. I wanted to make it a little bit more natural. So I've just gone and tweaked everything and played around. I've got all these switched off at the moment. These are all my compressor channels. The next thing I have to decide too is, I'm just going to switch screens here, and if we go down, I want to show you, okay, there's all my, so just bring this back up. So here's my strings, here's my piano. Now what I have to decide is, you know, are these going to be playing as I have them here? Are they going to be playing through the verses and choruses, or will I cut some out? What's going to go where? So I really want to rearrange the score essentially, but not really rewriting anything, just wanting to make space for everything to work and meld nicely. So I've had to go back to the drawing board a little bit on this one, because it is a difficult song. There's a lot of instrumentation going on. Still working on it. I'm going to re-record some of the guitars and just go through the mics, because originally I DI'd them. They sound pretty good, sound fine, but I think I'd like to try and just see how they sound recorded through some condenser mics and things like that. This is one of the things when you're mixing, if you're not happy with it, go back, see what's good with it, see what you can change, and then just work things in. So this might be the last video I do on this one for a little while, until I come back to master it, and then once I got things where I want it, we'll have a look at a master. And until then, that's everything for this week that I wanted to look at. Next video, I'll do a video on reference tracks and why we use them, what's the best way to use them, and then go from there and compare them and match them together and have a look at a few different things. And look, thanks for sticking around. That's everything for today. My name's Shannon at AUDIONRG.com. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends. Please subscribe to the channel. And I think we'll leave it there. Have a great one. Cheers.